Good evening, everyone. I'm Amanda Bradley, and I'm the chair of the trustees of the Athena Art Foundation. And I warmly welcome you to our launch on behalf of our board of trustees, Professor Sussan Babaie, who's talking to us tonight, Mark Harris and Suzanne Marriott. We'd hoped to mark the occasion with the summer drinks, but having seen some of the images from Susan's talk earlier, I know this will be an even more sparkling affair. Athena was co-founded by Nicola Jennings, Irene Brooke, Loie DeVore, and me, because as ardent scholars of old paintings, we felt that fewer and fewer people were looking at, studying, and understanding pre-modern art. Our aim is to readdress that imbalance. We hope to get more people to look at and understand the many virtues of art and history. And as a consequence, we hope that many of the teaching posts in universities that have been lost to contemporary subjects will one day be reinstated. We hope that courses will become more object-led rather than theory-based, and students will once again know the difference between Bellini and Bellori. Engaged looking and considered appreciation is not elitist. We aim to engage a broad church. I feel that beauty somehow become to be viewed with disdain, often linked to a vanished way of living, or this misunderstood notion that connoisseurship is just for entitled grand tourists. Object appreciation is not about ownership, but about scholarly discourse, and it's good for the soul. We want to reaffirm that old art is relevant. The human condition endures. The hopes, fears, loves, and losses of those represented in the past are still felt by us today. Human experience, love, death, sex, has been consecrated and revered through mythological and religious art, and indeed some still life painting and landscapes. And actually, on a more philosophical bent, I feel these experiences have conversely become trivialized and impersonal through the often flimsy and casual artistic concepts of today. Old art can give form and context to our own experiences now. So how are we going to do this? We are digital, and this means we have scale and have a global reach. And importantly, we are not just about the Western tradition. We will use many digital platforms to engage old art skeptics, but we will also reach out to curators and scholars across the world. Our content will have a strong thought leadership. And I think many of you will have noticed our little logo, which is a riff on a Greek coin featuring Athena's owl. And as I know this audience will appreciate, Athena was the patron of wisdom, just causes, and civilizing arts. And actually for me, that little coin also encapsulates the twin art historical traditions of the Courtauld and Warburg Institutes. And indeed, 3 of us are Courtauld alumni. The notion of bringing art to life is difficult to do well, but this is what we will do. And in the same vein that Renaissance poets composed witty verses in the voice of recently discovered antique statues, we too will give a voice to the past. And to tell you more about that, I will hand over to the indefatigable Nicola Jennings, who is truly the driving force and powerhouse behind Athena. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you, Amanda. I want to start by thanking Amanda for being such a wonderful chair and for the enormous contribution she's made to shaping Athena. For several years, Amanda, Irene, Loie, and I have been talking about how to get more people looking at great pre-modern art. We all believe that this art can tell us a lot about who we are today and who we could become tomorrow. And so it came as no surprise that there was a huge appetite for high quality digital content during lockdown, although it raised several issues as well. First, the sheer volume of material that was being uploaded to websites, Instagram, and YouTube that no one person has time to sift through. Second, that the content getting the most attention is presented in innovative and exciting ways, offering fresh perspectives and sometimes respite from personal crises. Third, that pre-modern art is vital to provide context on many current debates. And the digital sphere offers us enormous potential to do this. Linked to this is the need to decenter art history so that a wider range of great traditions feature, and where appropriate, connections are made between them. Some of the larger museums are doing this now and producing brilliant content, but many, especially the smaller ones and those in the developing world, are hamstrung by lack of funding. And this creates a huge gap in the digital offer. Our mission is to address this gap and to find the best content in museums and collections and arts organizations around the world and present it on the Athena Hub, which I'm just showing you here. I hope you can all see it. And also in our social media sites, such as Instagram, in a way that's engaging and educational, offering layers of content which reach out to a wide audience, ranging from those just beginning to get interested to art history students, and then to scholars and specialists. So here on our homepage, you can go straight to the hub by pressing the Explore button, which I'll do in a minute, but you can also scroll down and choose to this 5 things to look at this week, which is a much lighter approach to different things, as you'll see when you, I hope, explore the hub at some point. And one of these options is a sort of deeper dive. If you press this first one, the pick of the month, you go into a bit where we focus each month on one particular topic, and we encourage visitors to dive deeper and to give us their comments and contributions. Alternatively, you can go straight to the core of the hub, which is here in the Explore tab, and that gives you a selection of different options. So you can look at exhibitions, you can listen to podcasts and films, you can attend, find out about talks and classes, and various other types of information such as publications, conferences, etc. So for example, in the exhibitions tab, we have a selection of current, what we think are some of the most interesting current exhibitions, and they tend to be ones which have got great educational content as well. Sorry, digital content and educational content as well. So you'll see that there's a real mix of different cultures, different types of exhibitions that are going on around the world. And we're trying to capture some of that. And some of them have been and gone, but still have great digital websites. But you can also choose another tab, say, for example, Learn More, where you can drill down to much deeper levels of information. So for example, the tab here takes you to upcoming conferences. This tab takes you to some new publications, there are journals, etc. Another thing which we're doing is we've got a section called Athena Platform. And one of the main things here is a new project that we have, which is we're hoping soon to offer a platform enabling curators and museums around the world to work together to produce online exhibitions at very low cost. We're working on this with Moyosa Media, who recently produced the Virtual Director's Choice for the National Gallery, and Vastari, which is an online platform connecting private and institutional collectors worldwide. We're going to produce a bit of original content, which we're calling Athena Originals. So for example, a podcast series we're going to be producing with the Fitzwilliam Museum and Carnegie Foundation, which we should launch in the early autumn. Another project is a series of short films looking at portraits we're working on with Megaverse, who specialize in combining interactive technologies and immersive and storytelling. Also involved in this is the writer and director Edem Kelman, the National Portrait Gallery, the National Youth Theatre, and Carnegie Foundation. And the idea with this is to enable the subjects in portraits, like this young boxer, Jem Belcher, whose portrait hangs in the National Portrait Gallery, to tell us their stories while maintaining the very painterly surface of the work. I mentioned, and we're very lucky to have had funding for this from the Cultural Recovery Fund and the Catherine Lewis Trust. We're also working, we also have social media. I mentioned our new Instagram. We'll be doing live streams too. And we're working on a series of TikToks with YouTuber Luke Cupforth, aimed at young people experiencing emotional distress. I'm going to show you a clip of this in a minute, and then hand over to Sussan Babaie, our trustee. But I just wanted first to thank the wider Athena team, including our amazing designer, Diego Fortunato, and our Brains Trust and Museums Advisory Group, whose names you'll find on the About Us page up here. So I'm going to show you the little clip, the TikTok video now. So just bear with me while I bring that up on my screen.
Is it all worth it? We can't say for sure, but here's what Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch thought. These figures are from the Garden of Earthly Delights, painted between 1490 and 1510. When we feel down, we may lack perspective. Stuck in our own heads, we become the centre of the world, and that world can be a pretty glum place. In his vision, sadness and suffering are single instruments in a grand orchestra of human emotion. So, if you're ever stuck in a rut, try spending some time with the Garden of Earthly Delights. It shows human life for the mad carnival that it is, and it can help to be reminded that you are part of it.
So I'm now delighted to introduce Sussan Babaie. Sussan is Professor of the Arts of Iran and Islam at the Courtauld Institute of Art. Before coming to London, Sussan taught at Smith College, the University of Michigan, and the Institut für Kunstgeschichte at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. She has also curated many exhibitions, including Strolling in Isfahan at Harvard University and Persian drawings in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. After Sussan speaks, there will be an opportunity for questions to Sussan, or indeed to any of us on the Athena team about our projects. To ask one, please raise your hand, and we will, and I'll ask you to unmute yourself, and if you like to turn off your video. So I'm going to hand over to Sussan right now.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I am delighted to be here, and thank you, Amanda, for your kind introductions. Really an honor to be in this company, and you have to forgive me if I am asking for us to look closely. I know you're all very close lookers, so to speak. So I'm going to share my screen and hope that all is good. Can everyone see my screen? I assume you can, right? Oh. Okay, so I have taken this as an opportunity to, as a trustee of the Athena Art Foundation, and as someone with, like the rest of you, with passionate intention to preserve art history of the pre-modern era to the best of our abilities. And teaching at the Courtauld, even though we do have art history taught that is of the material from the pre-modern period, we still have to fight to preserve what is historical in the process. The talk is actually simply inspired by the incredible exhibition Epic Iran at the Victoria and Albert Museum, which I hope you have seen or else will have a chance to see. It's probably the solution or the healing balm after a year and a half of being stuck at home and behind scenes of flatness, basically. And it's a magnificent exhibition in the selection of the objects and in the incredible claim that it puts. It's not a false claim, it's a real historical one, of the deep history of cultural production of consequence from the Iranian plateau. And I'm grateful to Ina Sarikhani, whose passion is really this exhibition, for offering me high resolution images of a folio from the Book of Kings, the Shahnameh, of which a detail is on the screen and has been the advertising pitch for us in general. So what I'd like to do is use this as a hook to speak about 16th century art from elsewhere, if you will, and to point to the fact that that elsewhere, in fact, was very much central to a vast Eurasian network of trade and cultural and technological exchanges. And this is meant to be an excuse to closely look at a couple of pages. Really, that's my focus. And I would like to use this to situate one of these wonderful, really artistic products of the 16th century. And I start with this one. I hope that you can see the details. These are the best images I could get a hold of, and it's very difficult to, in fact, talk about these images and look at them and teach about them through the lens of reproductions and digital media. Nonetheless, I'd like to point to the fact that the page is one of hundreds of a magnificent manuscript of the Shahnameh, a copy of the Shahnameh that was made for Shah Tahmasp, the second Safavid ruler, in the workshops, the atelier, scriptorium, library of the royal household in the city of Tabriz in northwestern Iran. The page I'm showing you is an extraordinary painting in the Aga Khan Museum in Toronto, but one amongst many by a group of artists, amongst whom the most famous I have chosen a few pages of to share with you. I want to point out to the size of this page, which is 47 by 32 centimeters, and to bring to your attention the incredible minuteness of the details that fill this page and this painting, which looks like it is floating above the folio of speckled, gold speckled paper, but also goes under and above and below the text boxes as we see here. This is one of the, in fact, first folios to be illustrated in this manuscript. And it is about the story of Geyumars. This is the court of Geyumars, essentially. And Geyumars, as the text box tells us, and as we understand from the stories by the poet Ferdowsi, who composed what is the longest epic poem and amongst the most important literary monuments, world monuments, really, the Shahnameh, is that this was the legendary king, the first legendary king. And the text gives us a sense of Geyumars, who became the king of the worlds. He first built his residence in the mountains. His prosperity and his palace rose from the mountains, and he and his people wore leopard pelts. Cultivation began from him, and the garments and food were ample and fresh. The text doesn't tell us exactly what is depicted, nor the artists are in fact representing what the text says. And that is one of the key aspects of looking at Persian painting, especially in the 15th and 16th centuries, where these are not illustrations of a text, a story, but rather complements to the story. The Shahnameh was written in the 11th century, at the end of the 10th, early 11th century, but it is recopied and copied and copied again and again by four royal patrons over the course of centuries across a vast area where Persian language was the lingua franca of high culture, essentially. So each time the manuscript is copied and indeed graced with these paintings, it is a new and timely and contemporary interpretation of the story within that time frame. Here we see Geyumars seated as if floating in the midst of this mountain structure. It's hard to call it a structure. These are floating figures, and indeed, if I get closer, you might even see not only those magnificent costumes, but also the details of faces in the rock formations, and a large number of details of natural phenomena in plant forms, animals, and indeed in terms of the juxtaposition of what is a mimetic, clearly a mimetic observation of nature, and the abstracted and imaginary construction of a vision, really, as it were. And to really see the magnificence of this luminous painted surfaces, the extraordinary details, and to remember that these are minute in size, that it is indeed that kind of looking in and closely and lingering on the details that is the goal of the artist, and really the ultimate sort of expression of what these Persian paintings aim to do. So they tell the story, of course, they complement the story, they place it within its time period. It is related to the expression and self-representation of the reigning monarch, and in relation to a long history of kingship, Iranian kingship, by way of the legendary kings like Geyumars, but also historical ones that form part of the Shahnameh as well. Here, the artist, the principal artist of this painting, by the name of Sultan Muhammad, down here I have put all those little texts that I thought if I take my time to ask you to look, you might also have time to, in fact, read some of this. It's about Sultan Muhammad, the artist, who a court librarian, royal librarian, Dost Muhammad, writes in 1544. This is an art historical document, if you will, which emerges in the 16th century in Iran, just as it does in, for instance, Europe. It's in that document that he says about Sultan Muhammad, artist of this folio. And we only know that not because Sultan Muhammad signed this page, but because of what Dost Muhammad tells us. He says, first is the rarity of the age, Master Sultan Muhammad, who has developed the depiction to such a degree that although it has 1,000 eyes, that is, depiction has 1,000 eyes, the celestial sphere, celestial sphere has 1,000 eyes. The celestial sphere has not seen his like. Among his creations, depicted in His Majesty's Shahnameh, that is this Shahnameh, is a scene of people wearing leopard skins. It is such that the lion-hearted of the jungle of depiction and the leopards and crocodiles of the workshop of ornamentation quail at the fangs of his pen and bend their necks before the awesomeness of the pictures. It's really in that kind of a, you have to unpack such statements. It's not as if we have a biography of Sultan Muhammad, but it's in these kinds of critical reflections on the artist's work and the way his brush, here mentioned as a pen, has acquired the status of the pen, actually, which in the Islamic context is the instrument for writing and therefore connected to reproduction of the word of God, as in the Quran. But here, the pen of the artist, the brush of the artist, acquires that kind of a level of status comparable to the pen of the calligrapher. It's in this painting that once one begins to look at it, and it's one of those paintings that cannot be seen behind a glass, cannot be seen hung on a wall properly, that you can also see those dramas that unfold in corners, in different parts of the painting, where you can hear the clambering of these monkeys in the trees hanging over the box of text. Actually, it's this magic, the very extraordinary capacity for the viewer to switch from reading to looking, from such details as the heads hidden in the rocks as if they are witnesses to the event, to actual monkeys playing in the mountains and so forth. It's that makes this play of visual and textual and the story and the extra textual images and their reference come to life, in fact, in a page such as the Court of Gueumars. The other one I wanted to focus on, and this one is in the exhibition and really well worth going, even if you go just for this page, although the whole exhibition is fantastic. This too is attributed to Sultan Muhammad, and indeed to the other artist, Mir Sayyid Ali, who also is referenced by Dost Muhammad as the Sayyid of the Immaculate Brush, the unique among the nations. Here, that close looking is required by, or actually put in place by the very fact that you turn pages. So when you look at a page such as this, which is part of a double page, obviously, this is a crucial aspect, is to remember that you read and slowly come to the paintings, and the paintings are not illustrating what one reads, but rather evoking and complementing and complicating, in fact, the stories, some of which are only or not needed to have a text to know, but are memorized and are immediately recognizable. That process of turning the page reveals this page, like the Court of Gueumars and like many other of these pages, to really shimmer in front of the light as the page turns. It's there that you begin to see the complex patterns that are juxtaposed in seemingly repetitive motifs, like these horses' backs here as they are rushing out of the painting, or the faces and shields that mark one side while the other side is rushing in this very loud battle scene, looking like frozen in time, but in fact, given those kinds of energies that come with one reconstructing in one's mind's eye and hearing in one's mind the activities, to notice the musicians up here playing with as much energy as possible, blowing into the horns and banging onto the drums. To notice, this is a night scene actually. Everything looks bright and clear, and as if none of them have a roundness, a shadow, or that there is a directed light, but rather it's the completeness of the picture that then the mind reconstructs. In other words, they are not descriptive. There is no real sort of mimetic representation not because they didn't know how to do it, but because that was the choice, that you do not describe, but you evoke through these paintings. That is part of really looking at Persian painting through the lens of a cultural habit of looking, a cultural habit of reading images, actually, and to notice how the light of the moon and the stars are just as importantly bright as the rest of the picture, while this is indeed a night scene. To note the sound of the horses running, the drama of what is essentially the victory of the Iranian king over his arch enemy, the Turanian king, and to always be alert to the fact that the details are very small, that you cannot stand back and look at these, need to be very close and look at them by way of both zeroing in on details, sort of traversing and transitioning from one segment to another, to notice the fact that the angel hovering upside down over this scene of what is essentially a murder scene is so sweetly in a corner, and it's no more than maybe a centimeter in height, and that the rest of the details describe for us a scene, a fully developed palace scene, inside of it, outside of it, with all the attendants and so forth. So the point about this is that they require a different habit of looking, actually. And it is there that I want to say that a manuscript like the Shahnameh of Shah Tahmasp, which has a large number of paintings bordering to 200 or so, is indeed carried out, masterminded, planned by a group of artists, librarians, and with the sort of input, if you will, of the patron, in the same manner as the program in the Sistine Chapel may be conceived, or other programs of visual production that we are accustomed to. The scale is small, but that, and the manner of approach is different, but that's because there are different habits of reading and looking and experiencing the materiality of the object itself. So ultimately, what really is embedded in looking at the paintings, such as the Court of Gayumars or the battle scene in Sarikhani collection, is that you would have had it not been for the fact that they are beyond our reach, you would have had the chance to actually touch the surfaces as well and feel the sort of the thickness of pigments, to feel the places where gold has been used and the gold has been tooled. So it's this complexity that is part of our thinking. And while I can understand perhaps a great deal of what is the iconographic and the storytelling and the technological representational qualities of works in 16th century contemporary of Sultan Muhammad, Mir Sayyid Ali, in Michelangelo, Raphael, Hieronymus Bosch, and so forth, it would bear fruit for us to decenter and really turn our attention towards those contemporaries elsewhere. And it's not just the Persian paintings, but it's also Ottoman works and Ming paintings and Mughal paintings and so forth. I'm just giving an example, really, in the end, of what seems to be, to me, a range of 16th century, early 16th century arts. And on that level, I wish we could have all gathered together and had a festivity with music and food and drinks and so forth. But that's the end of my little presentation. And thank you. here we are.
Sussan, thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful talk. I'm going to, well, you know, first of all, I want to say that we will have a party. Not yet, we can't have one yet, but we will have one as soon as we can. So we promise that. And let's hope we can have it in, you know, in late September, early October. Let's hope that by then things are, you know, we're allowed to gather in large groups and celebrate together. So, you know, we'll come back to you on that one. But now, would anybody like to ask Sussan any questions about this? And of course, you can also ask myself or Amanda or Irene. I don't think Loie is here because she's had a family issue which she's had to deal with. But if we're also very happy to answer questions. We also have some of the producers here. I know Luke Cupforth is here, whose video I shared with you earlier, the TikTok video. So if anybody would like to ask questions, would you raise your hand, please? What you need to do is you in the reactions, is that how you do it? Yeah, in the reactions, you should have a little button enabling you to raise your hand. And then I will ask you to unmute. It might take me a minute to find you because there are quite a few of you here. So I don't know if anybody has any questions they would like to ask Sussan or anyone else. You have any questions, right?
Just ask everyone that they know out.
Well, while people are thinking about questions, you could just wave at the video if you can't find it, because we've got the whole screen up there. You've got the, so I've got my son helping me here to manage this. I mean, I just wanted to say that, you know, I know that one isn't supposed to compare apples and pears, and obviously comparing the art that Sussan was talking about with art that was being produced in Europe in a similar period is not necessarily relevant, but it did make me think of some of the illuminations the Lambourg brothers produced for the Très Riche, and that sort of idea of evoking another universe, so something which is not entirely of this world, and that sort of combination of mimesis and fantasy, which, you know, through this incredibly focused detail and gorgeous colors and you know, things floating in the air. So that was just a comment, I suppose.
And a very appropriate one for if I may just respond to that, again, hoping that anyone who wishes to ask a question about the foundation, actually, more than about what I just said, is that the material that falls in the category, let's say, of Persian painting, because it is not really an art form that uses representational technologies like European material of, say, perspective or light and shade and modulation of forms and so forth. And its subject areas are so alien, really, to art history as a field, where much of what we are trained to do, broadly speaking, is to read a European sort of cultural material, be it iconography of Christian material, or else various classical motifs and subject matters and so forth. So one of the side effects has been that these kinds of works are relegated to the category of charming and ornamental and beautiful, but rarely really thought of as being as much about thinking through painting as any painting that we know in a European context. So it's really worth sort of getting over the hurdle of not knowing what they are about in order to discover really a different world in art, and to explore teaching things outside and promoting things outside of our canonical European material. That's one of the roles I play with the Athena Art Foundation.
Allow everyone to unmute them.
Absolutely, Sussan. Well, that's why we very much said to you, your role is to push us out of our comfort zones. But also, we hope that you know, all of you listening tonight. I mean, there's a lot of art historical expertise in the room. So you know, we hope that you'll all come to us with suggestions and, you know, ideas for podcasts, and indeed want to participate in podcasts, and, you know, tell us about the exhibitions that you're putting on. I see that I have a question from Amanda. Amanda, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wondered, Sussan, you were talking about, you know, people handling these manuscripts, and I wondered if in the same way that, you know, Renaissance collectors handled their bronzes and even exchanged them, were these manuscripts exchanged in the same way?
Yeah, it's really that kind of handling of the object is a crucial part of the whole thing. They were handed around. We know that there were gatherings of the cognoscenti who would sit around and look at the manuscript and hand it around. Or actually, there is a particularly interesting intellectual game involved, which is these are not signed, just as poetry is not. So if it is not the famous poet Ferdowsi and the Shahnameh, but someone who is not as well known, a poet might compose a line that reminds you of a master, but is different from it. And the recognition of who is the master who has inspired this poem would be one of the ways to show off one's erudition. In painting, similarly, the recognition of the hand of an artist who has worked so hard to sort of cover the traces of it is a connoissorial exercise that we understand from those kinds of gatherings that took place at the court. So the objects were handed around in just such environments, but also gifted. This manuscript of the Shahnameh was gifted at the accession of Sultan Selim, the Ottoman Sultan, by Shah Tahmasp. And it's really interesting to remember that this is the time when the Ottomans and the Safavids are fighting over shared borders that run on Western Iran, Eastern Anatolia, include Armenia and Georgia. And the Safavids did not have the same military might that the Ottomans did. But the Safavid Shah sends this manuscript as if sending a message that you may beat me in the battlefield, but let's see what you can do to match this piece, for instance. It's a really incredible gift when you think about what gifts mean, you know, the Marcel Mauss thinking about gifts, but how politically charged it was to send this manuscript to the new Sultan in Istanbul.
Thank you, Sussan. I think we have a question from Tim Ashley.
I'm you. Hello. I'm absolutely not an expert, so possibly rather a naive question, but I remember once learning that the distinction between the Florentine and Venetian schools of Renaissance painting was the difference between form and colour, and that one of the great advantages that the Venetians had was the trade routes bringing in pigments from the mysterious East. And looking at these and looking at the astonishing colours in them, it made me wonder, to what extent was there any contraflow of materials or techniques of conceptions of how to make an image from what was going on in Europe back towards there, as there was indeed, I think at some point, during the period of the Impressionists between Paris and Moscow, for example.
Yeah. There's no evidence at all that European painting styles, let's say Venetian colorist's approach, has anything to do or had any sort of, if you will, impact on Persian painting of this period. It would be useful to, for instance, think about a trajectory of historical development of Persian painting, say from 14th century onwards, so you can kind of see how it is developing into what becomes this really very high point in artistic production, which is largely the result of having artists from various centers of production in the newly conquered empire of the Safavids. So later on in the 17th century, European prints make their way all over Asia, and indeed European painting styles are also adopted and adapted and played with. But at this point, there is absolutely no evidence of such. I mean, there were exchanges, and Venetians looked at, for instance, metalwork from Eastern Mediterranean. They collected textiles, and so there are other aspects. But Europe to the east, kind of flow of information or influence, God forbid, to use that terrible term, is really not there at this time. It comes later when Europe rises, and indeed is all over the place, more in the 17th century.
Thank you.
I see
Oh, Arun.
Arun, yeah.
Will you unmute yourself?
Yes, hi. So I just had one quick question and observation. When I saw this art, and I have not been exposed to the Persian art, so I'm not really into art, but when I saw this, it just reminded me of all the Mughal art I have seen in India.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to connect the two, because there seems to be a significant influence of this on the art that came, especially in North India, not so much in South India, but also one of the very famous languages originated around that time at the border of Persia and India. I think Urdu. Urdu is a language which came from a mixture of Persian, Hindi, the language from India, and also I think some other parts from the like Arabic and all. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on when did this influence really started moving into India? Because a lot of paintings I see are look exactly similar, or these were much better versus what I have seen before.
It's different. Yeah, absolutely. With South Asia, the rise of this, the sort of the, if you will, Persianate cultural scene. So this is a Persianate cultural landscape where it goes from really the Ottoman territories all the way to Western China, and has to do with the literary language being Persian, and Persian being the sort of the high Persian, right? Classical Persian, written in Arabic script. So Urdu, Farsi, Kurdish, and various other languages that fall under this sort of mother tongue of Persian are more vernaculars of various parts of this region. But even Turkic speakers, like in Central Asia or in Ottoman territories, use Persian for that high literary context. So the Mughals come out of Afghanistan. They claim themselves and are indeed descendants of Tamerlane and Timurid family, and bring with them to India or South Asia, broadly speaking, the cultures that were sort of forged in Central Asia, Iran, and Afghanistan during the time of Timurids. And manuscripts were a huge product of that period. And so in the 16th century, in addition to the fact that they are really looking at their ancestral heritage, they also very pointedly are looking at the Safavid court art. So Emperor Humayun takes refuge at the court of Shah Tahmasp, and when he returns, reputedly, he brings two of the great painters of the court of Shah Tahmasp back with him to Delhi. And those two, together with Hindu, Jain artists who are local artists, and of course, Muslim artists, because Islam is in India already from late 11th century, to form what becomes Mughal School of Art, which is a synthesis and a thing of its own. It's really a development distinct on its own. Thank you for these wonderful questions. Didn't think I will have an audience like this.
I think if there are no more, Nicola, we should probably wrap up there. And
yeah, unless anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question quickly. Now's your chance, now or never. Amanda,
well,
I think
thank you all for coming very much, and to Sussan. It was a really beautiful
pleasure.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you all. Good night.
Bye.